Greetings. For those of you who are hearing this around the time it's being given, Shabbat Shalom to you. This is the Sabbath after the 8 days, the Festival of Tabernacles, and the 8th day of Sacred Assembly. So we're kind of in the afterglow of the festival season. Quite some time back, my wife Linda had cataract surgery on one eye, and this coming Tuesday, she has cataract surgery on the other one. Which one is that? The left or the right? I guess it's your left eye, what you're pointing to. So if you're hearing this around that time, we'd appreciate your prayers that everything will go very smoothly as the first operation went. And we hope that all of you have come home safe and sound, in good condition, spiritually and physically, from these 8 days, wherever you may have been observing them. You know, there was a couple of friends, Jack and Jim, and Jack went with Jim to the races, to the horse races, and he bet on let's say horse number 3, and horse number 3 lost. Jack bet on horse number 3. Horse number 3 lost. So Jim told him, "I know how to make a horse fast." So Jack said, "Really? How do you make a horse fast?" And Jim said, "Don't feed him anything." Now, the reason I bring that up is because some of my friends kept the Festival of Tabernacles in a place called, and the 8th day of Sacred Assembly, in a place called Hungry Horse, Montana. So wherever you kept it, I know some of you did keep it in Hungry Horse, Montana. Wherever you kept it, we hope and pray that it was beneficial to you, and long term in terms of the spiritual value that you got out of it. And hopefully the ministers who taught you there brought out much of the significance of those special days. And I want to pursue that a little further. Some of you may have heard about what I'm going to talk about today at your festival site, or maybe you heard it in times gone by, but many of you perhaps did not. There's only so much that can be covered in the 8 days. So I want to talk today about, I'll call it the greater Exodus. Some people call it the second Exodus, and that's but I would rather call it the greater Exodus, because that's how it's described in the Bible. And I want to go to John 15. Jesus says before his arrest in John 15:13, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you." Those who are a part of the authentic Church of Jesus Christ, the one he founded when he was here on earth in his ministry, they should have a more effective perspective on Bible prophecy, I would think, because, you share with your friends what you're going to do. And so one would expect that the Church of God would have a more effective understanding of biblical prophecy. Obviously, there's what's the word, lacunae, or there are spaces in there. There may be wide gaps in there, that we don't fully understand, but, neither do others for that matter. But there ought to be a lot that we can understand, and as time goes on, especially as we get closer and closer to the events, we ought to be understanding more and more. And one of the meanings of this festival season that we have recently observed, the Festival of Tabernacles and the 8th day of Sacred Assembly, one of the important meanings of that, of going into a temporary dwelling for that period of time, of leaving your home and going somewhere else, journeying to the feast site, and home again. One lesson that we learn, well, let me put it to you this way. Why are we commanded to keep the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, there's a New Testament significance in John 1. We want to understand that God literally tabernacled with us that the Word of God became flesh. So during the Festival of Tabernacles, we celebrate the ministry of Jesus Christ. But way back in ancient times, when the command was first given to keep the festival, why were we to keep it? So hopefully you heard this. But in Leviticus 23, I'm going back there now, around verse 41 is what I want. Leviticus 23, I'm still in Numbers, and so I'll go back one more book. So the sabbatical year is over, and I hope that many of you did read through the Pentateuch during the sabbatical year. Before I finish in Leviticus 23, I want to apologize for not doing a separate message on the Sabbath during the Festival of Tabernacles. That was my original intent, but I apologize for not doing it. But I do want to alert you, those of you who have not yet been alerted one way or the other, that there are many of the messages that I gave at the Festival of Tabernacles and the 8th day of Sacred Assembly are available on the Flare channel. And in fact, I gave a message this morning relating to that season of the year that's on the Flare channel, if you care to check that out. And I'm grateful to be back today to give a message today on this Sabbath after the festival, and after the festival season. And in Leviticus 23, it's in verse 42, it says, "You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the eternal your God." We are to remember the wilderness experience. We're to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Not only the liberation that we focus on in the spring, but the journey, the fact that they had to go from Egypt to the Promised Land and spend a period of time in the wilderness in temporary dwellings. Now, it wasn't supposed to take 40 years initially. It was supposed to be a lot shorter than that. But there was to be a period of time, a transition period in the wilderness in temporary dwellings, and we were to remember that. But it also foreshadows a second Exodus. And so as we keep the Festival of Tabernacles each year and remember the wilderness experience, we need to remember also that in the future there's going to be a second Exodus. The modern descendants of the children of Israel are once again going to be brought back to the Promised Land, in full. Not a trickle here, a trickle there, but the nation will be reconstituted in the land that God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It came through that line, through the line of Jacob, who's also called Israel. It came through it came through Israel, or Yaakov, Jacob, or Yisrael, Israel. Now, we understand that in Old Testament times, the nation of Israel was the church. And initially it was organized in 12 tribes. There were 12 tribes of Israel. And they were to play an important role in God's plan of salvation. They were to play an important role in history. And if we read the Bible carefully, we can't escape the importance of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we need to have an understanding that we need to at least be concerned with their identity. Who are they? Now, we understand that there's a remnant of the nation of Israel, the house of Judah, that has survived and kept the title of Israel. There is a major section of that nation that has been lost to history, the northern kingdom. But the southern kingdom has retained that identity as Israel. But it is basically the tribe of Judah. And also, of course, Levi is in there. But Levi was to be scattered. It wasn't to have a territory of its own. It had cities here and cities there. And there are other elements of the tribes within the nation of Judah. But it is basically Judah. Well, what about the other tribes of Israel? All through the Bible, we read about them. And we do read about, in effect, two branches of the nation, Israel and Judah. And Israel had a very special promise, the promise of the birthright, physical abundance, political power. If you read through the prophecies given about to the people of the northern kingdom, particularly the descendants of Joseph. On the other hand, Judah had, in a way, a spiritual blessing. From Judah would come ultimately the King of Kings, the Messiah, Mashiach, in Greek, Christos. He would have to come from Judah, and finally it was narrowed down to the family of David. So we have the scepter and the birthright. And in 1 Chronicles, I want to go there, and I have to remember the King James order of the books, which is different than the Hebrew order. So let's go back to the historical section here, and let's go historical, not hysterical. Let's go to 1 Chronicles 5 and verse 2. And here is a clear statement. It talks about Reuben, who was the firstborn of Leah. But in the second verse, it says, "Yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler." I've spoken about that a moment ago. Although the birthright was Joseph's. Joseph means may he add. Joseph means increase, prosperity. And Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel. And he became the birthright tribe. And in fact, in Genesis 48, Jacob elevated his grandsons to become as if they were sons, because Joseph was given a double portion. So now Ephraim and Manasseh become tribes of Israel. So in effect, there's 13 tribes. But since the Levites didn't have a separate territory, but were scattered in 48 cities, in effect, we still have the 12 tribes that had territory. Now, Simeon also, because of its volatility, was kept within Judah. The territory of Simeon was all surrounded by Judah to kind of keep a lid on them. They were rather volatile people. But the other tribes had territories adjoining each other. And so much of the Bible is devoted to talking about these 12 tribes. You would think that they would have a role through history. I mean, the Bible was written for generations and generations. And we have an entire chapter in Genesis 49 and a chapter in Deuteronomy 33 prophesying about these 12 tribes. Some of you may know the artwork of Marc Chagall, the stained glass windows that you find in the Hadassah Hospital Chapel, I believe. I was there and saw those beautiful windows, and they're based on Deuteronomy 33 and Genesis 49 and what is said about those various tribes. I want to go to Psalm 78. And again, a distinction is made between the birthright blessing and the scepter promise. Here in Psalm 78 and verse 67, we see the other side of the coin. You might say, "Moreover, he rejected the tent of Joseph and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim." Why would you think he might? Because they are the birthright tribe. But the scepter goes to Judah. But chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. So you see that the birthright is Joseph's, the scepter is Judah, and there's a distinction made. And in the Bible, you see, in effect, two branches of the nation, the Israel and Judah. Now, under David, they were united. David ruled all the nation of Israel from Jerusalem. Jerusalem, D.C., Jerusalem, David's capital. He ruled the nation from Jerusalem, and it was a united nation, and Solomon ruled it as a united nation. But then it was broken up into two, and then the northern nation was taken into captivity. It was, in effect, forcibly moved out. You might call it ethnic cleansing. Now, they weren't exterminated. No doubt many of them died, but the tribes did migrate forcibly. They were forced to migrate further east into what is today Iraq and Iran. Now, what happened to those tribes? Now, if you know anything about medieval history, you know that from the area which used to be called the Soviet Union, tribes migrated from there into Europe and even over into the British Isles ultimately. And of course, from the British Isles, colonized other areas, including North America, from which I'm speaking now. I'm speaking English. England is our mother country here in the United States. Well, where did these tribes come from that were in what we used to call the Soviet Union? They didn't spontaneously generate there. No, they came up from the Middle East. And by the time they had reached that area and had come across, had reached what we used to call the USSR, and let's call it Central Asia. By the time they had reached Central Asia and were migrating across to Europe, it was 1,000 years practically after. It was 1,000 years after the tribes of Israel had been displaced. So the people migrated in those days as tribes, but over time you could understand how tribes could lose a knowledge of their origin. We're talking about 1,000 years of history. And you could lose your knowledge of your origin, particularly if it wasn't that important to you for a while, for periods of time, and perhaps if it would cause you trouble if you admitted it, at times, and also if over a period of time your nation had become generally illiterate, unlearned, where you wouldn't be able to do the research and the study to uncover your true origins. You can understand how after 10 centuries or so, tribes, as they migrate, could lose the knowledge of their origin, and this is what happened. This is why we talk about the lost 10 tribes. Now, people who are skeptics, who don't take the Bible literally, might discount the concept of the lost 10 tribes, but people who take the Bible literally do understand that there are lost tribes of Israel, and their concern is what to do about it. Now, various alternatives have been suggested. One alternative, which was very interesting to me, is there was an archaeologist who's on television under the title of The Naked Archaeologist. He's a Canadian Jew, and some of you have probably seen his programs. He went around looking for lost tribes, but what was he finding? He was finding lost Jews. Not so much. He was finding, let's say, exotic Jewish communities here and there. They were obviously keeping Jewish traditions, had a connection to the Jewish people. So yes, it's wonderful that they could be regathered to their people. But they do not represent lost Israelite tribes. Lost Israelite tribes are not necessarily going to be keeping traditions that were part of let's say, Judaism over the centuries. These people had cut themselves off from that religion way back in the days of Jeroboam, when the Israelite kingdom began. And those who really wanted to maintain the religion of the Bible, many of them fled south and became absorbed into Judah. So these tribes as a whole, would not necessarily be quote-unquote Jewish. They're Israelite. Now, yes, all Jews are Israelites. That's true. But not all Israelites are Jews. I live in Florida. All Floridians are Americans, but not all Americans are Floridian. Now, when I taught my children to memorize the 12 tribes of Israel, I taught them to memorize them by ethnic background. Let's go to Genesis 35. Genesis 35. So what I'm telling you today, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, whoever's listening, is that there are nations today, modern nations, whose dominant ethnic group are descendants of those lost tribes. And they are going to someday be regathered together with the Jews that are scattered around the world still, and regathered into their ancient homeland. And they will understand then, they will know who they are at that time. But if you go to Genesis 35, actually I won't have time to go through it, but take a look at the end of that chapter, towards the end of that chapter, and see how the tribes are organized. There was one father, but 4 different mothers. So we have obviously differences among the tribes. They came from 4 different mothers. Not only that, but many of the sons of Jacob married women north of Canaan. They were not necessarily Canaanite. Now Judah did marry, he had He had Canaanite wives, but I'm talking now about many of the other sons that very likely married before they ever came south to Canaan, so their wives were not necessarily Canaanite, and so you would expect to find differences between, say, the Judahites to the south, and then the northern kingdom. You would expect to find some differences there, and especially after so many years of being separated too, over the centuries, you'd expect to find certain differences. So, in other words, we're not looking for lost Jews. We're looking for lost Israelites, even though it's all one nation. But they have had separate histories now for quite some time. They are going to eventually be reunited. And there's a foreshadowing of that in the very dramatic story of Joseph. And I want to go to Genesis 45. Genesis 45. And then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Very dramatic. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. So here we have Joseph revealing himself to his brothers, and we have this reunion. Something similar is going to happen as we come to the climax of human history and the second coming of Christ. The children of Israel and the children of Judah will be reunited, and they will understand that they all are part of the same nation. And it will be quite a startling revelation to many of them. But they do have a role to play in history, a very important role to play in history that they have not yet fully played. As much influence as they have had on history, there is a spiritual influence that they must yet have. They are going to be the center of God's church in the millennium. Jesus Christ will rule the world from Jerusalem, and all of the 12 tribes will be regathered in the boundaries that God promised Israel anciently. So it'll be a much larger territory because it's including, of course, 12 tribes. But from there, the world will be influenced will be converted to God's way of life. We see in Isaiah 19 how Assyria and Egypt become part of a triple entente with Israel evidently early in the millennium, to get, as we will use the metaphor, to get the ball rolling. Now I want to go to Matthew 19. And you see the importance of the tribes of Israel. Jesus Christ called 12 apostles, God's number of organized beginnings. And if you go to Matthew 19, I want to go to Matthew 19 and verse 28 or so. Matthew 19 and verse 28 is what I want. So let's go to 27. Okay, the question that Peter asks. Peter was the bold one to ask questions. Then Peter answered and said to him, "See, we have left all and followed you. And therefore, what shall we have?" So Jesus said to them, to the apostles, "Assuredly, I say to you, that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." So the apostles are called, 12 of them. Now one betrayed Jesus, was replaced by Matthias. And so we have the 12 apostles ruling over the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, the apostle Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. Now there's much more to the story. Much more to the story. When you go to the end of the story, before the coming of Christ, you come to Revelation 7. And without necessarily turning there at this moment, I'll say this: you have 144,000 protected when God judges those who've been persecuting the descendants of modern Israel and persecuting spiritual Israel, the church. There are 144,000 protected. and there's 12,000 of each tribe. So that has to mean something. You can interpret it how, there may be ways to interpret it, but you can't ignore it. There are 144,000, 12,000 from each of the tribes of Israel. Now, Dan is not included there, but in Ezekiel 48, when you see the end-time kingdom of Israel, the millennial kingdom, look at Ezekiel 48, Dan is there. So Dan comes let's say, comes to itself as a nation later than the others, but Dan is there finally. So that the tribes are there. And you see that the apostles are ruling over the tribes are there. Ezekiel 37 prophesies about the reunion of the tribes, that a resurrected David will rule over them, and then over them, of course, will be Jesus Christ. But he talks about a reunion of Israel and Judah, a reunion of those two nations. And as I said, a resurrected David ruling over them. Now I want to go to Jeremiah the 16th chapter. Jeremiah the 16th chapter. Now I understand that there has been a regathering of many Israelites to the land of Israel. We're talking about the Jewish people and the Zionist movement and so on. And of course, even before that, they had begun coming back. But now we have this, in effect, it is a fulfillment of prophecy. Judah is supposed to be there in the end time, and they are. And we don't want to discount the importance of the regathering of Judah to their ancestral homeland. Now, I myself was involved back in the 60s. I attended a couple of mass demonstrations on behalf of Soviet Jewry. And eventually, the walls came tumbling down, curtain came tumbling down, and there was a mass exodus, in fact, from the former Soviet Union, and many of them did come back to the land of Israel. So I don't discount that, but I'm saying there's far more that it must yet happen. In Jeremiah 16th chapter, am I there? I want to go around verse 14. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that it shall no more be said, the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt. But the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from all the lands where he had driven them. For I will bring them, for I will bring them back into their land, which I gave to their fathers. And it's going to be so amazing, it will dwarf the earlier Exodus. Now, that earlier Exodus was amazing. It's so miraculous, so sensational that, Hollywood has had a field day with it. And people who want to tell their Bible stories to children have a field day with it. But what's coming is going to even eclipse that. Because, first of all, the end-time events are going to be so cataclysmic. But besides that, the number of people involved and the territory involved will far eclipse what happened in the days of Moses and Joshua. I want to go to Jeremiah 23. Talking about this second Exodus, Jeremiah 23. I'm in verse 5 of Jeremiah 23. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper, and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. Now this is his name by which he will be called, Adonai Tzidkenu. The Lord, the eternal, our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the days are... And so we're talking millennium here. We're talking about the second coming of Christ. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that they shall no longer say, as the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives who brought up and led the descendants of the house of Israel from the north country, and from all the countries where I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. Now, during the Festival of Tabernacles, as we're journeying to another place and staying in temporary dwellings, we should be thinking about that. And in fact, Hosea talks about it in the 12th chapter. God tells the people of Israel this in Hosea 12 and verse 9. And this basically was a prophecy given to the northern kingdom, the book of Hosea. I'm verse 9 of Hosea 12. But I am the Lord your God, ever since the land of Egypt. I will again make you dwell in tents, as in the days of the appointed feast. So you're going to be in temporary dwellings as when you keep the feast. And when is that going to be? As you travel back to the land that I promised you. In other words, as the millennium begins, and the Feast of Tabernacles pictures the millennium, and it pictures the second Exodus at the beginning of the millennium. But I am the Lord your God ever since the land of Egypt. I will again make you dwell in tents as in the days of the appointed feast. That's what he says here. And there's so many verses I want to go to, but let's go to Revelation, the book of Revelation. As we come to the end of the story, I want to go to Revelation, the 21st chapter. We're talking now about the New Jerusalem. So evidently, these 12 tribes of Israel, as I said, they have an important role to play in history, biblical history and history in general. And they have an important role to play in church history. They represented the church anciently, and in the millennium, they will be the core of God's church initially in the millennium. But it may be that as God organizes his kingdom on the spirit level, as he resurrects human beings to immortal life, he may organize his kingdom in terms of 12 as an antitype of the 12 tribes of Israel. That is to say, the nations of the world will, in a way, be, as their resurrected beings, may be organized according to the 12 tribes of Israel. It may be a functional matter in God's kingdom. I'm speculating, but it's something to keep in mind based upon Revelation 21. I'm now reading about the New Jerusalem. So I'm coming now to the end of the story, as it were, to the incredible human potential, to where history is going, where God's plan of salvation is going. And I go to Revelation and verse 12. Verse 14. Revelation 21. Did I say 21? Revelation 21, verse 12. But first, let's go to 14. 14, because remember, the apostles were to be ruling over the 12 tribes of Israel. And when we talk about this city, this New Jerusalem, well, it says this about it. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So obviously, they're the founding fathers, as it were, of the church of the New Testament, and their names are there on the 12 foundations of the wall of the city, as we read about the New Jerusalem. But what else do we read about? What have we read about 2 verses earlier? Revelation 21:12, talking about the New Jerusalem. Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So you come to the conclusion, you come to spirit life, you come to the family of God, and you still have reference to the 12 tribes of Israel. So this reality, this biblical reality, should not be ignored as we study history and prophecy, and as we keep these various festival days which foreshadow prophetic events. And as we keep the Festival of Tabernacles in years to come, let's remember the prophecy of the second Exodus, the greater Exodus. All the best to you and yours.